When Allah created hell, he found it not bad enough, and so he made Mesopotamia, and then added fly.
عندما خلق الله النار وجدت أنه ليس سيئا بما فيه الكفاية، وهكذا خلقه بلاد ما بين النهرين ثم أضاف الذباب.
The land of Mesopotamia is old, so old that it is said to have held the home of Adam and Eve. Mesopotamia is an ancient Greek word meaning land between two rivers. The two rivers here being the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Garden of Eden is claimed to have been here, along with the Tower of Babel and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. During the First World War, many of Gargrave's young men heard the call to take up arms for the defence of their country. Two of these brave Gargrave lads who volunteered to serve in the armed forces found themselves in this ancient landscape, but under conditions that would never have existed in the fabled garden. Richard Wiseman, a regular soldier who joined the Royal Field Artillery in 1909. He was initially posted to Kirki in India. He did not expect to be in Mesopotamia. Sam Naylor, a volunteer in Kitchener's New Army. He served in France, Gallipoli and Egypt. His next and last posting was to Mesopotamia. The move to Mesopotamia was prompted by a need to protect the newly established British oil interests. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company's oil terminus at Abadan was in need of protection from the advancing German and Ottoman troops. The British Indian government and the government in Whitehall determined to send troops from India into the area to provide protection. The Royal Navy brought an advance force, the 6th Poona Division, from India to Mesopotamia. The advance force arrived in Abadan November 1914. Along with the Indian troops were regular British soldiers from different regiments, including the 82nd Battery of the Royal Field Artillery. This was the unit with which Richard Wiseman was serving. Over the next few weeks, the Turkish force numbers grew considerably, greatly increasing the threat to British interests in the region. The advance force of Indian and British troops was not able to continue repelling the Ottoman invaders. Reinforcements were urgently needed, and soon after the rainy season had started, more British troops arrived to strengthen the advance force. There were few roads suitable for rapid movement of great numbers of troops, their bulky fighting equipment and support stores. The rivers of Mesopotamia became the main means of transport. A great variety of rivercraft were used and converted to gunships, transports, waterborne ambulances, and hospital ships. All that was really needed at this time was to secure the area around Basra, which would protect the oil terminus at Abadan from attack. The terminus was the vital source of the Royal Navy's fuel supply. Commentators of the time have suggested that, if the English had been satisfied with that, the misfortune that was to come to them might never have occurred. But the whole expedition was essentially political rather than military in its nature. To prevent Ottoman raids on the British Persian Gulf interests and provide adequate protection for Basra, secure control of the Shatt al-Arab Delta was needed. The town Al-Qurna, strategically placed above the river junction where the Tigris spills into the Euphrates, was the key. A move with around 2,100 men was made on Al-Qurna, where Ottoman troops numbering about 1,000 fighting men were entrenched. Any force attacking from the south, would need to negotiate these two large rivers, making it a good defensive position. The attacks on the town continued for several days. On the 9th of December, the Turkish commander, Suli Bey, surrendered. A total of 1,030 men and officers of the Ottoman forces were taken into captivity. There then followed several months of relative quiet, broken only by the Turkish failed offensive on Al-Qurna, carried out between the 11th and 17th of April 1915. A plan was hatched to provide a series of positive reports for the combined propaganda machine of the British and Indian governments. This plan was to undertake an expedition which would push onward from Al-Qurna to challenge the Ottoman forces defending Baghdad. The new commander, General Nixon, ordered General Townsend to take his force up the Tigris towards Baghdad. The first settlement General Townsend's forces secured from the Turks during the second advance was Amara. The Ottoman forces surrendered this town to the British on June the 3rd. The advance continued at a pace, and Kut el-Amara was occupied by the Anglo-Indian force on the 11th of September 1915. Although reinforcements arrived mid-October, they were exhausted and of insufficient numbers to provide an adequate force for the successful conquest of Baghdad. Townsend decided that his troops were in need of rest and argued against stretching his supply line any further without strengthening the supply route from Basra. He also stressed the need for further transport and trench warfare equipment. Here, General Townsend's troops would stay until the beginning of November. General Nixon, buoyed up by General Townsend's successes, pressed his demands for the advance on Baghdad. He dismissed General Townsend's requests for further transport and additional supplies. Both the government at Whitehall and the government in India were persuaded to continue the advance on Baghdad without an appreciation of the true situation in Mesopotamia. Expecting reinforcements which were never to materialize, the 6th Division left Kut on Monday, November the 15th, to march on Baghdad. On the 22nd of November, the Anglo-British forces were in a position to attack Ctesiphon. Ctesiphon, the ancient capital city of the Sassanids and the Parthians, and known to present-day Arabs as Al-Madain, lies some 64 kilometers from Kut al-Amara and 32 from Baghdad. The land around the river Tigris at this point can be easily defended. 4 divisions of the 6th Turkish Army, under the control of Nureddin Bey, were tasked with defending these positions. Nureddin's force was made up of 4 divisions: the 35th, the 38th, the 45th and the 51st. These divisions were a mix of races and of active and reserve soldiers, giving Nureddin command over 18,000 infantry troops. The Ottoman troops had taken advantage of the landscape and had dug extensive entrenchments on both banks of the river. Remnants of Ctesiphon's city wall now form a bank some 6 meters high with 2 arms set at right angles, each wall extending some 400 meters. The first defence line of trenches lay immediately behind these ancient ruins. Almost midway between the Turkish and second lines of defence rises the Great Arch of Ctesiphon. The arch, despite being in ruins, is still the largest unsupported brick arch in the world, at about 37 meters in height. General Townsend realised that an attack on both sides of the river was impracticable. The division of his forces would have weakened the attack and exposed his troops to greater danger. Townsend's force was made up of 11,000 battle-tired Indian and British troops who were unlikely to be reinforced from Basra, nearly 500 kilometres away. Townsend concentrated his attack on the east bank. To take the Turks by surprise, Townshend ordered a night march at the end of the day on 21st of November, with the intention of attacking at dawn on the 22nd. Due to poor ground conditions on the West Bank, some of the Turkish troops had been repositioned to the East Bank. Consequently, Townshend's forces found themselves attacking a much stronger defence than expected from the East Bank positions. The two gunships that were to accompany the force were prevented from joining in the attack by heavy gunfire, extensive river mines and obstructions. Colonel Nureddin, the Turkish commander, seeing inactivity on the West Bank, brought the remainder of his troops to reinforce his East Bank line. The battle raged for 3 days, with losses on both sides being very heavy. And on the third day of the battle, both commanders ordered a withdrawal. The Anglo-Indian force lost around 4,400 men during the battle, and Townshend came to the conclusion that to continue to try to take Baghdad would be folly. Colonel Nureddin, with losses even greater than that of the British forces at around 6,200 men from a force of 18,000, despite the fact that he could readily call upon reinforcements from Baghdad, came to the same conclusion. Nureddin realised that the British were retreating, he about-faced, and ordered his forces to pursue the Anglo-Indian force fleeing back towards Kut. Reconnaissance aircraft at the disposal of General Townshend reported Nureddin's about-turn, causing Townshend to speed up his retreat. The retreating force was harried throughout the journey to Kut by both Arab tribesmen and the Ottoman forces. The dishevelled and disheartened retreating troops arrived at Kut al-Amana on the 2nd of December 1915. The main body of the force camped for the night a few miles outside the township of mud brick buildings. On the 3rd of December, they marched into town, where they spent the rest of the day in relative peace. On the 4th, they began digging in along a line of defence that had previously been prepared, stretching from the town's fort across the neck of the loop to its western arm. On the 5th of December, the siege began. The Turkish troops, commanded by Nureddin, had begun to encircle the town, pounding with shrapnel shells and sniping with small arms fire. That evening, the remaining British and Indian cavalry units were ordered to leave before the cordon closed completely. They successfully escaped. More troops of the 6th Turkish Army, under the command of the 72-year-old Prussian Generalfeldmarschall Baron Colmar von der Goltz, arrived on the 7th of December with sufficient Ottoman troops and equipment to lay effective siege to the British garrison. Goltz successfully held the siege and repelled several relief expeditions, including the final failed attempt on the 5th of April 1916 by the British 13th Division. The British 13th Division, composed of battle-hardened troops who had seen action in other theatres of war, including Gallipoli, now came into the Mesopotamian campaign. Sam Naylor was a member of this force, having served in France and Gallipoli as one of Kitchener's new army. On the collapse of the Gallipoli campaign in January 1916, Sam found himself with the rest of the 13th Division in Egypt to regroup, recover and re-equip for the next phase. This respite was short-lived, as the troops, although not battle-ready, were required urgently elsewhere. During the unit's refurbishment, Higher Command decided that the next job of the division was to reinforce the Anglo-Indian forces attempting the relief of the siege of Kut al-Amara in Mesopotamia. On the 12th of February 1916, the division began to make ready for their move. The journey from Egypt to Basra and further to the Tigris to join the rest of the Tigris Corps took until the end of March 1916. They started their journey by boarding the HMT Corsican at 2 p.m. on February the 18th. The following morning, February 19th, they set sail and travelled through the Red Sea, passing Aden, Nazira, and along the coast to the Persian Gulf. Once in the Gulf, they travelled north to Kuwait, which they reached on the 26th of February. And there they waited until the 3rd of March before being transshipped to their next transport, a shallow draft steamer designed for river work called the Thongwa. They sailed along the Shat al-Arab, the confluence of the Tigris and the Euphrates, heading toward the base camp of the Mesopotamia Expeditionary Force, reaching Basra on the 6th of March. By the 27th of March, the division had assembled near Sheikh Saad. The division then took part in the attempt to relieve Kut. On the 16th of April 1916, the 13th supported the 7th Lahore Division on the right bank of the Tigris during the capture of the Bait Isa line. On the night of the 16th and 17th of April 1916, the Khalil Pasha committed his reserves to a counter-attack to retake Bait Isa. The counter-attack took place just as the 13th Division was preparing to storm the Turks' next defensive position. It was on the 18th of April that Sam Naylor died. With this last attempt to relieve Kut al-Amara a complete failure, there seemed little hope for the besieged troops, and on the 29th of April, the Kut al-Amara garrison commander, General Townsend, surrendered. General Townsend's last message reads, "A Turkish regiment approaching fort to take over guards in Kut. I have hoisted the white flag over town and fort. Troops commence going into camp near Shumran at 2 o'clock. Will shortly destroy the wireless, worn out as it is. To all ships and stations from Kut, goodbye and good luck to all." The siege had lasted 147 days, and the surviving 13,000 Allied soldiers and auxiliaries were taken as prisoners of war to be marched over 1,000 kilometers to Aleppo and further. General Townsend did not need to march anywhere. He was taken by various transports, including road, rail and horseback, to the island of Halki on the Sea of Marmara. After a short stay on Halki, he was moved to the island of Principe, where he spent the rest of the war under house arrest in a luxury villa, the Villa Hampson. In captivity, he was treated as an honoured guest, with a personal staff of 6, consisting of Colonel Parr, Captain Morland, an Indian servant, a Portuguese cook, and 2 orderlies. He was even furnished with transport in the form of a launch and a car. A far different fate was to befall his unfortunate men. A total of 13,309 British and Indian troops, together with non-combatants, went into captivity, where over 5,600 died, amongst them Gunner Richard Wiseman. Not one of the surviving members of the besieged force were in any condition to complete the march to their final destinations, nearly 1,300 miles from Kut al-Amara. Richard Wiseman ended up at a place called Bahçe in Turkey for imprisonment and forced labour. At Bahçe, a workforce of Armenian prisoners was driving a rail tunnel 12 miles through the Amarnas Mountains. The first group of British and Indian survivors of the Long March was seen by an Armenian priest at the Bahçe railway station. The group of around 200 had reached Barche after nightfall, and according to Grigoris Balakian, the Armenian priest, the group were humpbacked, in tatters, covered in dust and reduced to skeletons. Their cheekbones were protruding, their eyes withdrawn deep into their sockets. In the darkness, an illusion of moving ghosts. Amongst these ghosts was Richard Wiseman. It is very probable that Richard did work for a brief time in Barche, but succumbed to enteric fever on the 3rd of September 1916. He was buried in the prisoner of war cemetery northeast of the railway station at Barche. After hostilities ceased, Richard Wiseman was later re-interred at Baghdad Northgate War Cemetery. The Northgate War Cemetery was badly damaged during the Iraq War. Very few of the men that died in action during the Mesopotamian campaign were interred in marked graves. 40,500 names of the members of Commonwealth forces who died during the Mesopotamian campaign are inscribed on the Basra Memorial. Sam Naylor's name can be found on panel 19.